Hello everybody and welcome to my first ever attempt at a Normielock challenge. As you can tell, I'm going to be playing Pokemon Firered. So what is a Nuzlocke? Essentially a Nuzlocke is just a fan-made set of self-imposed rules to make the game even more challenging for veteran players. And there's only 3 important rules to a Nuzlocke. Rule number 1, always name your Pokemon. And rule number 2, whenever you enter a new zone, you must always attempt to capture the first Pokemon you run into, while only having 1 attempt. And rule number 3, if your Pokemon just so happen to faint due battle or poison or fire effects, those Pokemon then become unusable for the rest of the game. However, one thing that's good about a Nuzlocke is at the end of the day, I get to create and set the rules for myself. So now let me show you the full list of the rules I plan on using for this challenge. Pause the video if you need to. And now that that's out of the way, let's discuss the elephant in the room. To my knowledge, during the main game, I do not believe there is a single normal type Pokemon that can actually learn the move Surf. I believe those are the Pokemon that you find after you've already quote-unquote like beaten the game, which means somewhere along the line, I'm gonna need a cheat. And you know what? We'll get there when we'll get there. So apparently Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been one of those card games that's been fucking up recently, and I do think it sucks because as someone who's very nostalgic for Yu-Gi-Oh!, you know, watching the show when I was younger, and the only reason why I kind of decided to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! Was 1, because my brother decided to buy me some Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, and 2, I was just really fucking bored. And the problem is the moment you start kind of talking about the problems, it just cascades into this giant mountain of shit. But when it comes to me, most of my problems are from the outside looking in because I come from, you know, a magic background. And the only reason I have a magic background is because I have friends that got me into magic, so please do not get angry at me Yu-Gi-Oh fans, because what I'm about to say and the problems that I'm about to bring up aren't just exclusive to Yu-Gi-Oh. You see this in other card games too, even Magic, but just for Magic in particular, it's just not to the same degree. So let's start with problem number 1, the learning curve. I think able for me to truly describe what the problem with the game being too difficult is, I need to show you this thing called a flowchart. Yu-Gi-Oh! Unfortunately for the new/casual gamer falls under the category of being anxiety inducing. And the reason for it being so anxiety inducing is because there's so much information that you need to soak up at once that it can become very overwhelming. You know, you have like 6 different types of creatures with very distinct styles of summoning them to the field. You eventually need to figure out what kind of deck/archetype you're going to use. You need to figure out the summonings, the timings, and you have like 4 different types of spell cards, and you have like 3 different types of trap cards, and you also have hand traps, and then you need to figure out combos and the interactions within your own deck, and the interactions between the fact that your opponent is going to stop you from trying to do your combos. And the truth is that there is so much more, but the problem is that this is something that will take a player anywhere between maybe at the very least 2 weeks, or at the very least for me it was 2 weeks. And even if you were to give a new player a very easy to understand deck, even they would still fall into the problems that I was describing to you. Like Raron, he fucking used Salamangreat and Dragon Maids, and those 2 decks were like one of the more simpler decks to actually get into the game. And even he was like getting overwhelmed with the information. So I'm not gonna lie, I really don't know how I missed it, but I'm glad that I found it. So apparently Raron, who's normally a Hearthstone streamer, he decided to give Yu-Gi-Oh! A bit of a chance. And unfortunately for Mr. Click to win Hearthstone player over here, he unfortunately came to the realization that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not beginner friendly. And I'm not gonna lie, it was so funny watching him fuck up and just watching a lot of YouTubers just react to him getting super fucking pissed off. And I'm not gonna lie, as someone myself who had to push through the grind, here I am sort of watching him fuck up a lot of plays, making me laugh actually. And I'm not gonna lie, he did his job. He fucking entertained me through the means of other YouTubers fucking reacting to him. Especially since the fact that I'm watching this Hearthstone player trying to play Yu-Gi-Oh! As if it is Hearthstone. Now he was capable of doing it with Dragon Maid, but when he moved to Salamangreat, oh my god. However, I will be giving him just a little bit of leeway because 1, he is a streamer. Streamers do this thing that I like to call 80-20 to 50-50. Look, I watch Osmongold and WPE videos, so I know what the fuck I'm talking about when it comes to this shit. 80-20 to 50-50 is essentially the ratios in which a streamer is willing to pay attention to their audience versus the game. Because you see, it is always a streamer's job to be entertaining at first before being a tryhard. Hence the ratios. And only a very few rare occasions would a guy actually spend 80% being engaged with the game versus 20% the audience. And that's if a game is really fucking good or extremely entertaining. So when he starts to complain about the game being like, oh, you know, this game is very complicated, or I don't know what the hell I'm doing, I understand that sentiment because at the end of the day, he's not really wrong. And I do agree with him. The difference is that I actually understand the way how the game is played, therefore my feelings is not as strong as his. And also I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just as complex as anybody else trying to figure out a new game for the first time. And again, Magic also has this problem, but every other card game besides Magic has this problem of mechanically cum dumping all over you, and you are required to suck up all of this information and figure it out. So I applaud him for the fact that he was actually willing to give this game 50% of his attention despite the fact that it demands all of it. And in all honesty, I actually wasn't really surprised by the fact that he decided to turn his brain off and just say, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna entertain my audience. Because in all honesty, the same thing happened to me when I was trying to get into Digimon. I kind of stopped pursuing Digimon when I realized that, yo, I'm not really going to have anybody to play with. But the same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! Happened with Digimon, this thing of like, okay, I'm slowly figuring out how to play the game, but it still took me like 2 weeks to figure out 90% of the mechanics, and there's still a couple more mechanics that I don't know. And even though the number of the mechanics I need to learn is so small, that's going to take me like, what, another week? So you're looking at 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks of trying to figure out the mechanics of one fucking game. But I'm not gonna lie, what kind of happened to the streamer does kind of suck because I think he now has this disdain and believes that he can never enjoy this game. And I feel like if he wasn't a streamer, he probably could have. But I will say this to Ron. Thank you for proving my point. Alright, so for this segment, when I use the word tribal, I normally mean archetype. Now I understand that this is a much smaller issue, but you know what, I think the Dark Magician archetype is probably the perfect one to talk about when bringing up a subject such as this. So, Dark Magician. I love it. You love it. It's also nostalgic along with Blue Eyes, Red Eyes, and of course Exodia, Egyptian God cards. Those monsters right there are essentially the Pikachu, Charmander, Squirtle of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe. And because Dark Magician is one of the OG monsters, it has around 61 cards for its archetype. And at a first glance, 61 cards sounds like enough to make a pure Dark Magician deck of 40 cards until you realize that out of 41 cards, excluding the 5 or 6 monsters for your extra deck, for your main deck, there's only like 11 or 13 cards you would actually ever use. But there's only 3 or 4 cards that you would ever run at max capacity at all times. Those cards being Magician's Rod, Magician's Soul, Soul Servant, and maybe Illusion of Chaos. And the only reason why I bring this up is because specific archetypes are only powerful by themselves. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that Dark Magician itself is actually really versatile in the sense that it can actually be mixed with Red Eyes and practically anything works with Invoked and Branded. But you're telling me that 76.5% of cards meant for this archetype is either A, useless or bad. And again, the only reason why Dark Magician doesn't look so bad is because you could put it with Invoked or Branded. You can mix it with stuff here or there. You can use it sparingly in other decks. But what that also means for the cards that aren't as popular as Dark Magician means that they are only powerful with their own archetype, and that's why they do not get played. Now let's talk about filler cards. Filler cards are essentially when you read it, you just go, man, that sucks. And Dark Magician, unfortunately, has a lot of them. And it's interesting because even when you decide to create the perfect deck around Dark Magician, you start wondering why it's not as strong as, let's say, like Sword Soul. And then you kind of figure out that the only card that's really holding back this Dark Magician archetype is Dark Magician. Because Dark Magician does jack shit. Like the fact that Buster Blader, Blackluster Soldier, and Guy of the Fierce Knight, the fact that all of these cards got retrains, and out of all of these retrains, you're telling me that you're just gonna ignore Dark Magician Girl, Red Eyes, Blue Eyes? Are you serious? I'm sorry, but Dark Magician himself needs to have an ability, especially in today's era of Yu-Gi-Oh! And honestly, I did come up with a couple of ideas for myself. What if he had an ability very similar to Dark Magician Girl? Like, yo, hey, here's 200 attack and defense for each continuous spell or trap cards on the field. Or maybe because Dark Magician is very graveyard reliant, might as well just give him an ability that matches that. And even one of the biggest problems that I'm also having with Dark Magician Girl is that she is supposed to be kind of like the support boss monster until you kind of read her effects and realize that, damn, her shit only matters if a lot of Dark Magician is going to be in the graveyard. However, that ability is pretty much useless, especially when you start reading the cards, and everything about Dark Magician is to make sure that he doesn't stay in the graveyard. And honestly, here's my rendition of a retrain for Dark Magician Girl. All I did was buff her up a little bit and decided to be like, hey, if any card effect would destroy a Dark Magician except for Dark Magician Girl, just send her ass to the graveyard to protect him for the rest of the turn. Look, I'm not asking for Dark Magician to become like a meta killer. I'm just saying make it more viable. I bring this up because there are 331 archetypes / decks, give or take, and this is even excluding the cards that don't have a specific archetype because they don't have an ability. Therefore, in locals, you only see at most 60 or 70 archetypes, because for most archetypes they are tribal only, meaning they are the most powerful within their own archetype. And the truth is that when you do look at the most powerful decks, they do run like 2 or 3 different engines. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'll definitely be giving Konami props for doing their greatest job of getting rid of the fluff. However, the problem still stays for something like Dark Magician. Dark Magician is the most important card of the Dark Magician archetype, and is also the most useless. So the truth is that I only want to touch on the artificial rarity just for a little bit, only because I'm someone who can wait for these cards. But what's the problem? Well, the problem is that this is something that praise not only both to the casual players, but the competitive players. And the reason why it's such a big problem is because the spikes set the tone for the entire game. That's where the complaints start to happen. Let me explain. Able for you to understand what I'm saying, you should check out this video, link in the description, called What Kind of Player Are You by a channel called Powerhammer Podcast. The summarized version of this episode is that they talk about this theory called psychographics, and what it is the 3 different mindsets that all players have when playing a game. And the 3 different mindsets have 3 different names, referred to as Timmy, Johnny, and Spike. And through these mindsets, each player has a different method when it comes to playing the game. So now let's break them down. Timmy is the Hulk Go Smash simpleton, Johnny is the combo synergy crack fiend, Spike is the meta tryhard. Now hopefully you remember what I said in the beginning of the segment. And for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's very obvious to tell who's who, especially when you see the decks that they tend to play. Timmy's decks are pretty much straightforward and very easy to understand, and Timmy is the part of your brain in which you have fun regardless if you win or lose. Johnny's decks are weirdly synergistic, but either be ridiculously good or ridiculously OP, like base. The Johnny part of your brain only has fun when he's theory crafting and watching his combos pop off. The Spike part of your brain only cares about being consistent and efficient, and the only way for that part of your brain to really have fun is only when they win. And Yu-Gi-Oh's landscape has changed so much to the point where being a pure Timmy and almost a pure Johnny have died out or evolved. Like the fact that you need to be a mix between Timmy Spike, Spike Johnny, or Spike Timmy and Johnny really kind of sucks, because that means that Spike controls the way how the game is played. Don't believe me? Then how come whenever I watch a deck profile video for an archetype, it's always main deck, 40 to maybe 42 cards? You need like 9 versions of disruption / board breaker spells. Every monster in your deck needs to have some type of effect to it. And very rarely do games actually make it to turn 3 or past turn 3. Here's actually a pretty important question. When you go to locals, what kind of deck do you take? Don't answer that, because you most likely bring a deck that's tournament ready. And the fact that you're always going to run into the same 60 to 70 archetypes, again, also proves to the theory that you're going to bring meta tier decks too. And again, for any new player trying to join, guess what decks they're going to have to go against? Like the fact that everybody's virtually going to be playing perfect decks for every archetype, and people's version of shaking things up is replacing like 1 or 2 cards. Again, the only reason why I'm saying this is because I'm trying to remind people as to why it's very difficult to get new people into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or the reasons as to why a lot of people believe that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is becoming stale. So the rarity problem, specifically with Bonfire. I'm actually one of those guys that really hates loot boxes in games, because it's also called pay to win. You pay to get an advantage, which is why Pot of Greed was banned. You see, Pot of Greed at the time made a lot of sense, especially when back in the day a lot of your normal monsters did jack shit. And it was a slow grind, and hopefully drawing into something like a Raigeki would help slow down your opponent to hopefully have you bounce back. But nowadays, not only drawing 2 extra cards without any repercussion, not only just a slight advantage, but an overwhelmingly powerful advantage. So why is Bonfire the talk of the town? But then we have to look back at Pot of Greed. You see, Pot of Greed had you draw 2 cards from your deck, in which case those cards are random. But then there's Rhoda, and that's what Bonfire pretty much is. Rhoda allows you to pick exactly what card you want. And it's also a new card. So when Konami does release new cards and new decks, well, the Timmy, Johnny, and Spike all get affected by this. And it preys on all parts of your brain. You see, Timmy is just excited for the new cards, while Johnny and Spike are the only people caring about the interactions and how strong those interactions will be. And remember, Spike wants to win, so if the only thing getting in the way is a price tag, well then that's nothing for Spike. And try as you might, but there is a point in which you can no longer fight the urges in your brain, that impulse buyer in you, as your brain just leans closer and tells you, but guess what? Spike and Johnny don't really care about the individual prices of these singles, but Timmy does. And remember, the fact that people are willing to spend 50 grand on a watch or 100 mil for a car, then $300 for one card is practically nothing. So please don't demonize any impulse buyers that feel forcefully persuaded into buying said advantage. Especially since the upcoming decks are going to be heavy in the Pyro Tribal, which means Bonfire will not only be extremely useful, but a requirement for said decks. That's unfortunately the nature of the game, and I know that there's going to be a lot of idiots going to be like, oh, why don't you just ignore it, blah, da, 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 da. I mean, you could try, but you can't, especially when there's going to be the part of you that eventually is going to get tired of just losing over and over. But the only thing that's happening is that you're just getting angry at a business practice that's been happening for decades. And sometimes you need something this enticing for people to want to buy your product. But no one's arguing that it's unethical, because the fact that someone is going to pay to have an advantage, and that may not be you. And it will feel bad, but that's what the ban list is for, right? So for this segment, I think for me this is probably the biggest problem that I personally have with Yu-Gi-Oh! The truth is, I'm actually very surprised that this isn't a problem that a lot of people either seem to notice or just gloss over as if it's not a problem at all. Or maybe it's just a problem to only me, and the only card game I can think of that doesn't have this problem is Magic. And the problem that I have is that there really is only one way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm not talking about digitally or the different standard formats. I mean, for the majority of players that actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! They really only play it one way, and that way is standard. I mean, yes, there's deck masters and there's speed duel, but whenever you go online, you notice that everyone either plays standard or there's just a shitload of deck profiles. And even when I watch those going to locals video, it's either about them buying cards for their deck or there's them doing their tournament. So far, there's only been one YouTube channel that I found where they actually try out everything, and that's Team APS. Which means you're either 100% of the time going to play standard, or 95% of the time standard, and 5% speed duels. And practically no one touches deck masters. And I know that someone in the comments is going to be like, hey, well, for Magic you only have standard and commander, but that's just not true. Here, let me show you this list. You have standard, two-headed giant, raid boss, commander, and dethrone. Not including the variants that some of them possess. So even if I was to include some of the variants, that is legit 7 ways to Yu-Gi-Oh's 3, more than double. And if I was to remove some of those variants, it would still be 5 to 3, which means Magic still provides more game modes than Yu-Gi-Oh does. You know, but what if you're someone who only plays standard Yu-Gi-Oh? I'm gonna be real with you, not many people are gonna be playing Raid Boss, then at best that is still 4 to 1. But again, I feel like this was something that is out of the player's hands. I don't blame players for the mechanics only being restricted to a 1v1 format. You know, despite the anime being like, oh yeah, you could have a 4v1. No, you can't. And I know that some people might wonder what the hell I play. I only play standard for the moment because speed duels, I'm not interested in speed duels. Speed duels is just the worst version of standard. But deck masters, now deck masters tickles the commander player in me. And I think I figured out a real good way to make commander work for Yu-Gi-Oh! But I'm not gonna reveal it just yet, because I don't want people stealing my idea. So I'm not gonna lie, these are all the problems that I noticed when coming in, and the truth is that Konami actually seems to be listening, even though it's happening very slowly. And I understand that when it comes to the competitive players, unfortunately you only have the ban list to look forward to, which I guess narrows it down to the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is really struggling getting new players. However, the unfortunate part is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is no longer mainstream relevant. So let me tell you what I mean. I remember growing up watching Yu-Gi-Oh! However, I was also part of a Christian family and I was told to stop, and the only reason why is because when I look back on it, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a lot darker of a TV show than I remember it being, and not at all for kids. And sure, there's the whole sacrificing to summon monsters, but there's also a ton of death and soul trapping, and your main character essentially just utters his own rendition of Shazam and becomes possessed by his ancestor. And don't get me wrong, yes, there was a whole bunch of memorable moments in the show, but it's not like the show is fucking good. Honestly, it kinda sucks, and it was also really boring to watch when I think about it too. But this is what I mean, outside of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Clique, no one's talking about your movies, because apparently there was one that happened in 2016, no one talked about it. No one's talking about your anime, your games, your card game is not new player friendly, no one in the mainstream is talking about you. And I'm of the belief system that if you want new players, you unfortunately need to give them a new game, because trying to force new players into an established game is going to happen to what happened with Ron over there. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I talk to my sister about this bullshit, and the truth is that she doesn't give a fuck. But, my sister asked me a question, which is like, hey, what's a way do you think new players can join Yu-Gi-Oh? Unfortunately, a video game. Because unfortunately, everything else isn't doing it, and I feel like video games, because video games are just so popular. And I'm not talking about a video game such as Master Duel, where it's like that almost felt like a way to combat COVID. I'm talking like a Pokemon style, traverse the world, customize your character, build your deck from scratch, and spoon feed us the rules and mechanics. It's similar to like choosing your own Pokemon starter. Give us decks that are like very specific to Tribute Summon, Links, Synchros, Fusion. Give us decks that are just exclusive to the games, one that we'll never be able to have in real life because they're just too powerful. Maybe make the world procedurally generated, and maybe have it so that we can invite our friends to our worlds. Maybe make it an MMO, or MMO Lite. And unfortunately, it's gonna need to have a top tier story, because any bad story will just make us leave. Like, that's the kind of game you need to entice new players. But remember, there's still going to be a lot of gamers that are going to keep a grudge ever since the Metal Gear Survive fiasco. Otherwise, just stick with your hardcore audience. Because in all honesty, I think the only thing Konami hasn't done is really double down on its hardcore player base. Like, if that's one thing I feel like Konami could do, they could look at Wizards and what Wizards of the Coast did for Commander. When Wizards of the Coast saw that Commander was becoming just as popular as Standard, and they were all like, oh my god, is it actually getting people into the game? They decided to create ready-to-play Commander decks for a reasonable price. Like, honestly, I'm surprised that they haven't gotten rid of structure decks, but for me, even though I find structure decks to be annoying, I still feel like for a content creator, or for someone who wants to play a new archetype on a super budget, I understand why structure decks are needed. But I'm actually very surprised that Konami hasn't made tournament legal ready decks for archetypes. I feel like that's the kind of variety that you can actually use, instead of the structure deck, yo, here's this $50 to $60 tournament ready version. Maybe you could call it the novice structure deck. And why stop there? Why not create your own YCS version of the deck? Maybe you could have all foils, custom deck box, custom sleeves for like $100 or $120. Call it the master structure deck. Again, it's not really a revolutionary idea, but the truth is that it would actually be good for your hardcore fans, because now your hardcore fans get to kind of pick your brain a little bit and see what you're thinking when it comes to playing these decks. And the only reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players need to understand that your game isn't for casuals. Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't been for the casuals ever since 2010. All that's left for Yu-Gi-Oh are the enthusiasts, aka your hardcore players that play casually. Because for a game as established as Yu-Gi-Oh, there are no casual players, because casual players like to do this thing I like to call, leave. Casual players, rarely do they ever stay to play something casually, unless it's good. But then at a certain point, they no longer remain casual players. You want to know something that's frustrating? It's the fact that after I recorded my video of me semi-ranting, Konami just so happens to drop some cool shit, fixing only one of the 4 problems that I have with modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is them finally reaching out to the mainstream audience. And I'm not gonna lie, it's some fire looking shit, especially with the fact that it looks like they're finally making anime based off of the lore instead of the card game, because watching someone play the card game is really fucking boring. Now, when I say when they're fixing one of the 4 problems, is because I saw some of the new cards they're going to be bringing in for certain archetypes, and they're not that great. And this has kind of been my problem, is that like, yo, you are revamping some of these cards over and over and over again, trying to make them viable, but you're not even making them viable for locals. The only reason why people are going to even try it out is because they're getting new cards. But you know what? Baby steps. However, that new Dark Magician card really has me puzzled. Like for instance, I saw the new kind of Dark Magician card and I realized that was no different than a card they already had before in Palladium Oracle Mahad. And honestly, after thinking about it, I think Palladium Oracle Mahad is much better, because when you draw it, you reveal it, special summon it, and then it has double damage during the damage step if it fights a monster. And when it dies, it special summons a Dark Magician card from the deck, hand, or graveyard. Which for me is stupid, especially when you consider that the new Dark Magician needs another card to special summon it, which means you need 2 cards to special summon 1 card, when Palladium Oracle Mahad already does that for you. And it confuses me because I feel like the fake version I created feels much stronger, or at the very least is on theme to what Dark Magician is trying to do. But you know, everyone's talking about the new Exodia cards, and those cards are just fine. Oh, don't get me wrong, I completely understand the fact that people are going to grab these cards and use them to their max potential. However, until I'm proven wrong, I'm not going to change my stance. But now that really just leaves the other 2 problems that I've had, which was A, the different game modes, and B, the video game. And in doing so, I ran into this game called Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duels, but this is just another problem that I have. So now there's apparently 7 to 4 game modes. However, how many people actually play this mode religiously, like standard? And this is sort of what's frustrating, is that Konami has this interesting idea, but then it feels like a lot of the rules surrounded this new idea is very much throwaway. I really feel like Yu-Gi-Tubers should make a poll for their own community asking them if they actually tried out the other game modes. Which now leaves the video game. Now personally for me, I don't think that what I'm asking for is a lot. I feel like that is the bare minimum of what you should be offering them, especially if you want to get new people involved with your franchise. But that's it, I'm very much done complaining for now. That's really all I had to talk about in terms of my problems with Yu-Gi-Oh! So like the video, share it, don't care if you agree with me. Hope you enjoyed, otherwise.
In the meantime, and as usual, go fuck yourself.